Welcome to AP Euro for Winners.
Today, we are continuing Unit 5 and talking about Napoleon's rise, dominance, and defeat. Again, College Board loves this topic, the French Revolution and Napoleon. So let's make sure we understand what that is. Let's talk about Napoleon's rise. So, before we get to actually how he rose, let's talk about some context. So, at this time, the French people have just gone through the revolution. People have been beheaded. There's a lot of instability going on. We have the removal of Catholic Church. We have social changes with literally beheadings and the reign of terror. We've got political changes with the National Assembly and then the convention and then the Committee of Public Safety, so on and so forth. So we're just getting a sense of chaos. And a lot of the French people are like, all right, I really just need stability. I kind of am looking for some tradition. Things are a little bit too crazy. So, 1794, Napoleon was a general in the French army. He becomes well known and popular because of his victories. So he's got a really good reputation and he's building it. Then in 1799, in November, Napoleon and other conspirators are going to participate in a coup to overthrow the Directory. The Directory is this government installed in place at the Committee of Public Safety after the Reign of Terror. Think back to the previous couple lessons. In December, Napoleon is named First Consul, kind of a fancy title, which is pretty much making him able to rule France without any rivals. And a new constitution of France is approved, which kind of makes that title official. And then we got a couple years later, in 1802, Napoleon is named consul for life, right? And then 1804, he's actually going to crown himself Emperor Napoleon. So you got to have a lot of guts to be able to crown yourself Emperor of Napoleon or Emperor Napoleon. It shows just how much power he had. The French people are generally going to actually embrace him. And it's not really that weird because, again, we talked about the chaos, the beheading of King Louis, all of these things. But they really want a return to stability, and that shows it in how much they did actually support Napoleon in the beginning. Let's take a quick second and look at the image on the right called the Coronation of Napoleon. This was painted in 1807. And you see Napoleon with the crown after he took it from the Pope. So that's this idea that Napoleon thinks he owes his throne to no one. It represents him ruling his country kind of as a monarchical way, right? A dictator, sort of someone who has all the power. Napoleon also said that he embodied the revolution. So he is going to kind of preach this, right, as his own people. So the people like the idea of a monarchy, which is turning back to stability and tradition, but they also like the idea that he might not go against all the stuff that the revolution just fought for, all the Enlightenment ideals. So they're thinking it's going to be a good combination of both. But let's look at just how enlightened Napoleon actually was.
Okay, so what are the Enlightenment ideas about Napoleon? Well, one thing is he's going to institute the Napoleonic Code. And this is basically a set of rules and laws that's going to provide equality for all citizens. And just to be clear here, when we are saying all citizens, we do mean men, but there is some equality here. All right. He's going to abolish serfdom, abolish feudalism. He's going to protect people's private property. So we do see some equal and enlightened ideas here. And then we're going to have something called the Concordat of 1801. This is going to introduce some religious toleration to France, specifically within the Catholic Church. So before this, remember that the revolution, we talked about this last time, the French Revolution had confiscated church lands in the name of the state. They had basically made the Catholic Church a villain, and they wanted a secular state under Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety. So Napoleon is going to rectify this. He's going to try to change this. He negotiates with the Pope to say that, yes, we are going to acknowledge Catholicism as a religion of France once again, which we know that Catholicism and France have a long history together, and that Catholics in France are going to be able to worship freely, but the state is still going to have control over the church. So there is some give and take here. Another enlightened idea, right? We're going to expand education. He's going to create secondary schools that are open to all classes. And he's going to centralize the government and the bureaucracy, right? So this is going to help him reinforce the Napoleonic codes that he's instituting. And he's going to grant positions in the government based on merit rather than birthright. So you don't just get this position. So a lot of these are some enlightened ideas that Napoleon puts forth.
But they only go so far. So now let's look at how absolutist was Napoleon. And if you think back to last unit too, when we talked about enlightened absolutism, Napoleon seems like an absolutely perfect case of this. So let's begin. Napoleon is going to promote the concepts of liberty, equality, and fraternity, right? These Enlightenment ideas. But he chooses his own power above all else, which usually meant suppressing the rights of his people. So now we get into the absolutism of it. So he's going to use a secret police that he creates to find any threats to his established order. The police could arrest and imprison dissenters without any jury or trial. So this went so far as to even regular innocent people were executed publicly to send a message to would-be supporters of anyone that was against Napoleon. So pretty intense there. Napoleon also eliminates direct elections for deputies, so this idea of representation or representative government kind of fades away. He's going to enact censorship, so no more freedom of the press that was gained with the revolution. So much so that he's going to even put in state-sponsored censors into the staff of every major newspaper. So he makes sure that censorship happens, and nothing is said that goes against him. And then this is one of the bigger points too, is that he actually goes and marginalizes women even further. So women had actually gained some rights with the revolution. Think back to when they like storming the Versailles, and they passed the Declaration of Rights of Women and so on and so forth. And they even actually thought of as citizens. But now Napoleon's like, nope, you're all dependents. So status is downgraded from citizen to dependents of either their fathers or husbands, whichever males are in their life. Divorce is going to become more difficult for women, and women could no longer hold property apart from their husbands or fathers. So while he did reward merit and talent, right, in the previous slide, he was often known for choosing his friends or people loyal to him or associates that married into his family for higher positions. So some were merit-based, but yet depending on how much he liked you. So kind of a contradiction of ideas here.
Now we're going to take a look at how Napoleon dominated Europe. All right, so Napoleon is extremely popular with his troops, and he masters the ideas of negotiation and military strategy. There's an old quote that says he's worth 40,000 men on the battlefield, which shows kind of how important Napoleon was in the military setting. He created citizen armies, and his troops moved very quickly to travel long distances. And the way they did this was by like living off the land. So as they would conquer one area, they would live off the land that was there, which meant that he didn't need to create these long supply lines that other armies needed to ensure food for everybody. Okay. So with these techniques, as you see in this map here, essentially everything in blue Napoleon had taken over by 1812. So this is a huge change in Europe, right? Napoleon, after the French Revolution, in about like 15 years, almost takes over all of Europe, all right? And he talks about his reasoning for this as wanting to spread the ideals of the revolution throughout Europe. So we can see how he's like trying to call back to some of those enlightened ideas. He thinks about his Napoleonic code as a way to liberate people. He gives away some of the church lands in these places to the peasants. He abolishes slavery in a lot of places. He reduces the power of the nobles, right? So there are some positives for people, which means when Napoleon comes in to take over their areas, they're not totally against it. Okay. So with this, he starts to think about himself as the emperor of Europe, not just the emperor of France. Even though some people are happy with this, right? And some people are okay with this because of some of his enlightened ideas, not everybody is okay with it. Not everybody wants to fall under Napoleon's rule.
So we're going to start to see his domination of Europe go a little bit on the decline. So while he did control most of Europe, he couldn't seem to conquer Great Britain, and he really wanted to. We've seen France versus Great Britain, this rivalry throughout the lessons that we've talked about. So what did Napoleon do in response? Well, he creates a system called the Continental System. And it's an economic warfare system that establishes a blockade aimed at destroying British trade. Specifically, it's shipping, as British ships are not allowed to dock at any port controlled by Napoleon, whether indirectly or directly. So they couldn't really go anywhere. Look at the map on the bottom right. Where is the British ships going to go? So foreign control is actually going to spark nationalistic responses within the areas that he either annexed or tried to conquer. And again, thinking back, nationalism is a strong identification with one's own people and one's own cultural heritage. So when you've got this French guy coming in and the French soldiers, some people are going to be like, yeah, no, this is my country. I don't want you in here. And we're going to look at three places in particular: Spain, Russia, and Germany.
So the first example we're going to look at is in Spain. So Napoleon wanted to move his troops through Spain to get to Portugal because he thought that Spain would fall pretty quickly and he'd get to Portugal, which is a big trading empire at the time, right? In 1808, Napoleon forced the King of Spain to abdicate, which means to give up his throne, and Napoleon appoints his brother, Joseph, to the throne. Now, obviously, some people in Spain are not going to like that, and they're going to revolt. And this is going to cause guerrilla warfare, which is basically warfare that's like not really following the traditional rules of war, and they're not like setting out when they're going to fight. It's just chaos, right? And so this is going to pin down a lot of Napoleon's troops. And this is where we actually see the term guerrilla warfare become like a term. It's from this time, okay? So citizens and women are going to join in the fight. So again, this is not just troops defending armies. This is basically everybody. Okay. And as you see pictured here on the right, this is a painting called The 3rd of May, which is from 1808, the scene here, but it was painted by Francisco Goya in 1814. But this is a scene that shows innocent Spanish men being shot by savage French troops. And so you can kind of see this kind of image is how people in Spain were feeling. And this is going to further spark nationalism among the Spanish in anger against Napoleon.
And Spain does fall under Napoleon's rule, but the people weren't going to go down that easy, right? Now, this is probably the most famous response to Napoleon. So if there's any of the three that you want to know, I highly recommend Russia. So let's take a deeper look. So in 1812, Napoleon actually invades Russia, and he's trying to get to Moscow. So he originally is going to ally with the Tsar, but Napoleon reneged on his agreement and they had, so the Tsar didn't like him. There's tension. That's a little bit of background there. So the Tsar orders a retreat and utilizes a scorched earth policy in his retreat. And this is an important policy because this is why Russia is successful. So as Napoleon's troops lived off the land, right, they didn't need those supply lines. What Russia is going to do is they retreat a little bit. So as Napoleon progresses, the Russian troops retreat, and they don't actually fight Napoleon's troops too much hand-to-hand combat. As they retreat, they literally, as it's called, scorch earth, they set the earth on fire. All the crops, anything that could possibly be used to live off of is no longer able to be lived off of, which means Napoleon's troops have no food, right? They have no way of maintaining their health. You take that and you add onto it Russia's insane winters, it's going to be a really bad combination. So Napoleon is known for having brought about 600,000 troops into Russia, right, and trying to invade Russia. But between scorched earth and winter, by the time he was like, all right, let's retreat, he only returns home with about 40,000 of those troops. So that is an insane amount of people dying. People even tried eating raw horse flesh to stay alive. Really bad situation. Didn't make Napoleon look too good. So this is a really good example of nationalism against France in a successful way because Napoleon doesn't actually take over Russia. So if we look at this image on the right, the view of the Kremlin during the burning of Moscow, we see that look at all the fire, right? The scorched earth is the prominent subject of that.
There's like an old saying, never invade Russia in the winter. And that kind of comes from this example of Napoleon trying to invade Russia. But we'll see other examples of that when we get to like World War II with Hitler. So this is like a classic mistake in history that some leaders try to make when they get into Russia. Russia's a big place. It's hard to take over. All right, third example of a nationalistic response is in Germany. So the German states are going to be reorganized by Napoleon, but the Germans are not going to like French rule, right? So Napoleon is able to take over the area that we would call Germany today, but they're not going to be happy with it. And over time, a lot of the allies that he has in Germany are going to desert him and they're going to join the War of Liberation. And so we see this contradiction between Napoleon thinking of himself as a liberator, something that the people want, but then regular people in Germany wanting to liberate themselves from his quote unquote liberation, right? So a little contradicting of ideas and right, who's really helping out the common person. And so we can see this pictured here on the right. In October of 1813, Napoleon gets defeated at the Battle of Leipzig, which is also called the Battle of Nations. And this is Napoleon's symbolic defeat before he officially surrenders 1 year later. And so this is kind of the end, the beginning of the end of his reign, because we'll kind of see how it ends a little bit in the next slide further.
All right, so let's look at that official end. So by 1814, Napoleon was stretched too thin. We saw the map of Europe. He had either had direct or indirect control over a lot of it, really hard to maintain. When he got back to France, there was an attempted coup. So it forces Napoleon to abdicate the throne. Because at this point, he didn't have as much support back home. He didn't really have any troops because they were all spread out to help him. He abdicates his throne and he is exiled to the Mediterranean island of Elba. That's pictured in the top right. But in the next year, in 1815, he's going to escape the island. And he returns to France, raises an army, and tries to dethrone his replacement king, King Louis XVIII. So it takes a lot of guts to be able to think you can do that and then actually try to do it. Other states at this point had just had enough of him. They joined into fighting him. Napoleon was pretty easily defeated in this famous battle called the Battle of Waterloo. And the results, he gets exiled again, but this time to a different island, St. Helena, which is kind of pictured in the bottom right, out in the middle of nowhere. And then that's where he lives out the rest of his life. He doesn't try to go back to France anymore. So Napoleon is over his reign. Here are College Board's historical developments. Take a read. As always, thank you for watching. This kind of concludes our talking about the French Revolution. So make sure we're really, really confident in this topic. Shout out to our AP Euro students, and we'll see you all for the next video on the Congress of Vienna.
Until then, bye.